I need to warn you right now, this isn't the story you learned in history class. This isn't the sanitized version about a brave martyr who went peacefully to her death, praying and serene. What happened in that prison cell in Rouen on the night of May 29, 1431, the night before Joan of Arc burned at the stake, was something the church spent 6 centuries trying to bury. And they very nearly succeeded. Because there was someone else in that cell. Someone history forgot on purpose. Her name was Marguerite de Flavy. She was 19 years old, a laundress's daughter convicted of theft, and for 9 days she shared a stone floor with the most famous prisoner in France. For 9 days she watched. She listened. She remembered. And what she witnessed in those final hours before dawn changed everything we thought we knew about Joan's last night on earth. This is her testimony, transcribed from a confession she gave to a parish priest in Compiègne in 1437, 6 years after Joan's execution. The document sat forgotten in church archives for nearly 600 years, until a graduate student at the Sorbonne stumbled across it while researching an entirely different topic. The pages were water-damaged, the ink faded to rust brown, but the words were still legible. And they were explosive. Let me take you there. To that cell. To that night. It's May 29, 1431. Rouen. The tower prison of Bouvrouil Castle rises like a broken tooth against the Norman sky. Inside, in a cell barely 8 feet square, Joan of Arc sits on the stone floor with her back against the wall. She's 19 years old, though she looks younger. Thinner. Her famous dark hair has been cropped short by her captors, growing back now in uneven patches. She wears a gray tunic, men's clothing, the very clothing that sealed her condemnation as a heretic. Her feet are bare. Her wrists show the marks of iron shackles, though they've been removed for the night. A small mercy, if you can call it that, hours before they burn you alive. Marguerite sits in the opposite corner. She's been in this cell for 3 weeks, waiting for her own trial, her own punishment. Probably the stocks, maybe branding if the magistrate is feeling vindictive. Nothing compared to what awaits the girl across from her. For the first 8 days they barely spoke. Joan spent most of her time in prayer, or staring at the narrow window high in the wall, watching the light change. Marguerite watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Everyone in France knew who Joan of Arc was. The Maid of Orleans. The girl who heard voices from God. The warrior who crowned a king. Now a prisoner who would die at dawn. But on that 9th night something changed. According to Marguerite's testimony, Joan didn't pray. She didn't pace. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and she spoke. Not to God. Not to saints. To Marguerite. I need you to remember something, Joan said. Her voice, Marguerite wrote, was steady. Not the voice of someone afraid. When I'm gone they will tell stories about me. Most of them will be lies. But I need someone to know the truth. Will you remember? Marguerite nodded. What else could she do? What Joan told her over the next 6 hours would shake the foundations of everything the Catholic Church claimed about her trial, her conviction, her heresy. Forget the official transcripts. Forget the testimonies carefully recorded by Bishop Pierre Cauchon's clerks. What Joan of Arc revealed to her cellmate in the darkness of that final night was something far more human, far more heartbreaking, and far more dangerous than anything that appeared in the trial records. She told Marguerite about the voices. Not the sanitized version she'd given to the ecclesiastical court. Not the careful answers designed to avoid charges of witchcraft. The truth. Joan described waking at 13 years old in her father's house in Domremy to find her room filled with light. Not metaphorical light. Not spiritual enlightenment. Actual physical light so bright it hurt her eyes. And in that light, she said, stood a figure. Not Saint Catherine. Not Saint Margaret. Not the Archangel Michael. A woman. Tall, dark-haired, wearing armor. French armor, but older, medieval. The woman spoke to her in French, not Latin. She told Joan things. Specific things. The location of the sword of Saint Catherine buried behind the altar at Saint Catherine de Fierbois. The exact disposition of English forces at Orleans. The name of the Dauphin's favorite horse. The secret sign she would need to give Charles VII to prove her divine mission. A sign so personal that only the two of them would ever know it. She came to me 7 times, Joan told Marguerite. Always at night. Always alone. The last time was the night before I left for Vaucouleurs. She told me I would crown a king, win a war, and die before I turned 20. She told me it was necessary. She never told me why. Marguerite's hand must have been shaking as she transcribed this years later. Because here's what Joan said next. The woman in her visions, the figure she had followed into battle, who had guided her through siege and combat, never once claimed to be a saint. never once claimed to speak for God. She only ever said one thing about her identity. I am what you will become. Think about that. Not, I am your guardian angel. Not, I am a messenger from heaven. I am what you will become. Past Joan speaking to present Joan. A closed loop. A prophecy that creates itself. The church called Joan's visions divine inspiration. They used her voices to justify her mission, then used those same voices to condemn her as a heretic when she was no longer useful. But what if the voices weren't divine at all? What if they were something stranger? Something the medieval mind had no framework to understand? Marguerite didn't have answers. She was an illiterate laundress's daughter who could barely write her own name. But she remembered. She remembered because Joan made her promise, made her swear on the life of her unborn children that she would tell someone someday what really happened in that cell. The night wore on. Joan spoke about other things. About the battles she'd fought, not as the legendary Maid of Orleans but as a terrified girl who'd watched men die screaming in the mud. About the weight of armor, 50 pounds of steel that left bruises on her shoulders and hips. About the arrow that struck her at Orleans, how it went clean through her shoulder and she could feel the iron scraping against bone. About pulling it out herself because no one else would touch her. Women don't fight, women don't bleed on battlefields, women don't do what you're doing and survive. She talked about Charles VII, the king she'd crowned at Reims. How he'd looked at her during the coronation with something between gratitude and fear. How she'd realized in that moment that she'd served her purpose, that a king who owed his throne to a peasant girl's visions would never feel secure as long as she lived. How he'd let the Burgundians capture her at Compiègne without attempting a ransom. How he'd sold her to the English for 10,000 francs. The going rate, apparently, for disposing of an inconvenient saint. He needed a miracle, Joan said. I gave him one. Then I became a problem. Around midnight, by Marguerite's account, the guards brought their final meal. Bread, weak ale, a piece of hard cheese. Joan ate slowly, methodically, like someone performing a ritual. She offered half to Marguerite, who took it, who ate because she was hungry and because refusing seemed worse somehow. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of Rouen outside settling into sleep. Tomorrow the square would be packed with spectators. The English had been building the pyre for 3 days, stacking wood high enough that the flames would be visible from the cathedral. They wanted everyone to see. They needed everyone to see. Because burning Joan of Arc wasn't just execution. It was theater. It was propaganda. It was the final chapter in a story they'd been writing since her capture. The heretic, the witch, the girl who claimed divine authority and paid the ultimate price for her presumption. Her death would prove that God had abandoned her, that her voices were demonic, that everything she'd accomplished was null and void. That's what the English needed the world to believe. But Joan knew better. They're not burning me for heresy, she told Marguerite. They're burning me because I won. Because a girl from Domremy did what their armies couldn't do. Because I proved that God doesn't only speak through priests and bishops and kings. That's the real crime. Not the voices. Not the men's clothing. Not the battles. The crime is that I made them irrelevant. It was around 2 in the morning when Joan started to cry. Not the desperate weeping you'd expect from someone facing imminent death. Quiet tears, steady like rain on stone. Marguerite asked her why. Why cry now after everything? After months of imprisonment, after the trial, after the torture, after the sentence? Joan's answer is preserved in Marguerite's testimony, and it's possibly the most human thing anyone ever recorded about her. I'm crying, she said, because I'm 19 years old and I'll never be 20. I'll never marry. Never have children. Never see another spring. Never taste wine. Never ride a horse for pleasure instead of war. Never grow old. I'm crying because I want to live and I'm going to die, and there's nothing divine about that. There's nothing noble. It's just death. And I'm so afraid. For 6 centuries, we've told Joan of Arc's story as a tale of unwavering faith, of a martyr who went to her death with absolute certainty in her divine purpose. But Marguerite's testimony reveals something the church never wanted us to know. Joan of Arc died afraid, died doubting, died human. Around 3 in the morning, something happened that Marguerite struggled to describe even years later. The air in the cell changed, became thicker, electric like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Joan stopped crying, sat up straighter, stared at the far wall of the cell with such intensity that Marguerite turned to look, expecting to see guards or priests, or someone coming to take Joan away early. But there was nothing. Just stone. Just shadow. She's here, Joan whispered. The woman. She came back. Marguerite saw nothing. Heard nothing. But Joan stood up, walked to the center of the cell, and began speaking to empty air. The conversation was one-sided, Joan asking questions, pausing for answers only she could hear, asking more questions. Marguerite caught fragments. Why didn't you tell me it would hurt this much? And was it worth it? And am I really what you were? And finally, desperately, is there any way to change this? Whatever answers Joan received, they weren't the ones she wanted. She sank back down to the floor, wrapped her arms around her knees and rocked back and forth like a child. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow. She says I have to go through with it. That everything depends on my death. That the story only works if I die young. If I die a martyr. That 600 years from now, people will still remember my name, still tell my story, still believe in what I represented. But only if I burn tomorrow. Only if I die exactly as they planned. What if you refuse? Marguerite asked. What if you recant? Confess to heresy? They might spare you. Joan laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. They offered me that yesterday. Life imprisonment in exchange for confession. Chains and darkness for the rest of my days instead of fire for 10 minutes. But if I recant, I'm not Joan of Arc anymore. I'm just another failed prophet. Another girl who claimed divine inspiration and turned out to be lying or mad. The story dies. The symbol dies. France forgets me within a generation. She looked at Marguerite with eyes that seemed decades older than 19. I'm already dead. I have been since Compiègne. The only question is whether my death means something. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when Joan finally fell silent. She didn't pray. Didn't ask for confession or last rites. She simply sat and waited for the dawn, one hand touching the place where that arrow had pierced her shoulder at Orleans, the scar hidden beneath her gray tunic. Physical proof that she'd fought, that she'd bled, that she'd been real. When the guards came at first light, Joan stood calmly. She let them bind her wrists. Let them lead her out of the cell and down the stone stairs toward the waiting crowd. But at the threshold, she turned back to Marguerite. Their eyes met. And Joan smiled. Not a brave smile. Not a saint's smile. Just a tired, sad acknowledgement of what was about to happen. Remember, she said. When they make me a legend, remember I was just a girl. Those were Joan of Arc's last words to anyone who knew her as human rather than symbol. 10 minutes later, she was in the old market square. 20 minutes later, she was burning. According to witnesses, she called out for Jesus 6 times before the smoke took her. The English kept the fires burning for hours, then scattered her ashes in the Seine so no relics could be recovered, no shrine could be built. They thought they were erasing her. They had no idea they were immortalizing her. Marguerite de Flavy was released from prison 3 weeks later, her theft charges mysteriously dismissed. She returned to Compiègne, married a carpenter, had 4 children. For 6 years she kept Joan's final testimony locked in her memory, afraid to speak, afraid of what the church might do if they knew what Joan had really said that last night. But in 1437, dying from fever after the birth of her 5th child, she called for the parish priest and dictated everything. The priest, horrified and fascinated, wrote it all down. Then he hid it in the church archives and prayed no one would ever read it. It took 600 years, but someone finally did. The document raises more questions than it answers. Was the woman in Joan's visions real? So what was she? A time traveler? A hallucination? A genuine divine messenger operating outside church doctrine? And what about Joan's claim that she had to die for the story to work, that her martyrdom was necessary for her legacy? Does that make her death a tragedy or a triumph? We'll never know for certain. The church declared Joan a saint in 1920, nearly 500 years after burning her as a heretic. They rehabilitated her, canonized her, turned her into everything they'd condemned her for claiming to be. The official narrative is set. The legend is secure. But Marguerite's testimony reminds us of something crucial. Before Joan of Arc was a saint, before she was a legend, before she was a symbol of French nationalism or Catholic martyrdom or female empowerment or military genius, she was a teenager in a prison cell. She was afraid. She was human. She wanted to live. And on her final night on earth, she cried. Not because her faith failed, but because her faith demanded everything and she gave it, knowing exactly what it would cost. That's not the story of a deluded heretic or a divine instrument. That's the story of someone who made an impossible choice and carried it through to the end, even though every human instinct screamed at her to run. History remembers the Maid of Orleans, the warrior, the saint, the martyr. But Marguerite de Flavy remembered something more important. The girl who sat on a stone floor at 3 in the morning, terrified and weeping, and chose to walk into the fire anyway. That's the truth about Joan of Arc's final night in prison. Not holy, not transcendent, just heartbreakingly, courageously human. And maybe that's the most divine thing about her after all.